Hey guys, how's it going? This is Waj from the MW Technology channel on YouTube, and in this video we're doing a direct comparison between the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. Now both of these laptop computers are coming from the 2013 lineup of MacBook computers from Apple. They're quite similar in a lot of ways in terms they're both very similar in terms of the physical dimensions of the screen sizes and things like that, but there are some distinct differences between the two that might sway you to go with one over the other. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those similarities and differences and see if either computer is right for you. So first off, we're taking a look at both computers on their baseline configuration. Now obviously you can upgrade each component to your heart's desire when you want to configure it and when you're actually purchasing it yourself to fit your needs a little bit better, but we're taking a look at the baseline versions of both models so we have a good kind of understanding on how these two computers compare against each other just on more of a basic level. Now the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the overall physical dimensions between these two, and if we take a look at them side by side, you'll notice that the MacBook Pro 13-inch measures about 12.35 inches in terms of its width, about 8.62 inches in terms of its depth, and the Air is fairly similar proportion. It's a little bit larger overall, about 12.8 inches in terms of width and about 8.94 inches in terms of its depth. Moving forward, you will notice that the MacBook Air definitely holds up to its name currently right now, being just a bit thinner overall. Now it obviously tapers from one end to the other, so it's at the small end it is about 0.11 inches thickness, and then its fattest end it's about 0.68 inches, which is just slightly thinner than the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which measures about 0.71 inches uniformly throughout the edges of the computer. Now there is additionally a slight difference in terms of weight as well. The MacBook Pro 13-inch measures about 3.46 pounds versus the Air is slightly lighter, measuring about 2.96 pounds. Furthermore, the similarities continue when we take a look at the keyboard, which is fully backlit on both laptops, and they both have that famous multi-touch, multi-gesture trackpad that has become synonymous with these type of computers. Now in terms of the inputs and outputs of both the computers, the 13-inch 2012 version of the MacBook Pro comes with two USB 3 ports, SD card, HDMI 1.4, dual mics, headphone jack, and a MagSafe connector. Now the MacBook Air has most of the ports that you'll find on the MacBook Pro, with the exception that it only has one Thunderbolt connection versus the MacBook Pro actually has two Thunderbolt connections. And the MacBook Pro 13-inch actually has Thunderbolt connections that are twice as fast as the one on the Air. It's rated up to 20 gigabits per second for data transferring versus the MacBook Air's Thunderbolt connection can do 10 gigabits per second. Additionally, another thing that the MacBook Air is missing is an HDMI 1.4 port that's in the MacBook Pro. So if you want to hook up the MacBook Air to an external display, you're going to have to rely on that single Thunderbolt connector. Now another big difference between the two laptops is that the 13-inch MacBook Pro is actually a Retina display. They don't currently offer the MacBook Air in a Retina version, so the resolution on the Pro is 2560 by 1600, and the Air's native resolution measures about 1440 by 900. Now moving forward, you'll find the exact same 720p front-facing FaceTime camera on both of the computers, so there's really no difference in terms of the front-facing cameras. And it's really not until you get to the internal specifications where you start noticing some of the slight differences between these two laptops. Now starting with the CPU, both the processors are actually part of the Haswell family of chips, and in terms of clock speed, you'll notice a faster clock speed on the MacBook Pro. It's clocked in about 2.4 gigahertz, and it can turbo boost up to 2.9 gigahertz, and it has 3 gigabytes of level 3 cache, versus the MacBook Air comes with 1.3 gigahertz stock, and it can turbo up to 2.6 gigahertz, and it also has 3 gigabytes of L3 cache. And in terms of most qualities, basically the MacBook Air is underclocked in order to get a better power management system so it can do better in terms of battery life, because that's really what it's designed for. It's designed to be as battery and power as efficient as possible. Now, obviously, we also get tremendously great battery life on the MacBook Pro too. But again, the MacBook Air is really designed to be the most ultimate portable computer possible, and that's why it has a underclock processor. Now, in terms of RAM, both the computers have pretty much identical properties in RAM. They both have 4 gigabytes of DDR3 clocked in about 1600 megahertz. So you get very similar performance in terms of RAM. Now, obviously, you can upgrade that to 8 gigs if you wish. But the cool thing about the new OS, Mavericks actually allocates physical system memory a lot better than the previous generations of Mac OS X, making your 4 gig almost 6 gigs in the OS. Now, in terms of the integrated graphics on both of these two laptops, since they come with pretty much the same processor, you'll notice that there isn't too much of a difference in terms of the integrated graphics performance. And really, in terms of testing out these physical properties of the hardware inside, we really have to put these two computers through some similar benchmarks to really see how the hardware sums up to real-world performance. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the Geekbench benchmark, and we're going to see how both of them kind of compare against each other. So we'll run both of them at the same time and see what our results are. Now, the Geekbench score on the 2013 MacBook Pro is about 8,258, and the Air got 7,068. So quite a significant difference, even though they both have very similar processors overall in terms of design and architecture, and they have the same amount of 4 gigs of RAM. So you could definitely see that the new Haswell chip is certainly faster in some regards. Now, the next thing that we're going to test out is a very CPU intensive benchmark called Cinebench, and we're going to see if the MacBook Pro really lives up to its name and see how much faster it is to the underclock CPU that's in the MacBook Air. Now, as soon as we start the benchmark, you'll notice that this is a multi-threaded application, so we're using all 4 threads of the dual-core processors, and you'll notice that the new MacBook Pro is actually a lot faster than the same Haswell chip that's in the Air. So you'll notice that it's going to finish this thing a lot quicker. And when we tally up all the results, you'll notice that the MacBook Pro finished almost 15 seconds earlier than the MacBook Air, and I got a score about 261 versus the Air got 230. So there's no doubt about it, the processor on the MacBook Pro is definitely pro. Okay, so now let's take the time to actually benchmark the flash drive that's inside both these two computers. They both come with 128 gigabytes of internal flash memory, which is very, very fast. And the first thing that we'll do to test out the overall speed of the SSDs inside is that we're going to do a simple boot up test, and we're going to see which one boots up OS X faster. And as you can see right over here, both of them are really, really quick. The MacBook Pro is just an edge, just a couple of seconds earlier than the MacBook Air. Now let's go ahead and do a more direct test of the speeds of the flash memory inside these two computers. We're going to open up Blackmagic Design's benchmarking tool. Now, interestingly enough, when we actually run the benchmark, you'll notice that the Air is actually faster in its write speeds. The current flash memory that's in the Air is actually getting almost 421.1 megabits per second in terms of its write speed, and the Pro is getting about 306. Now, obviously, this will fluctuate back and forth, but this is the little screen capture that I made. But in terms of the write speed, you'll notice that the Pro is definitely faster. It is getting about 734 megabits per second in terms of its write, and about 662 on the MacBook Air. Now, both of them are really, really fast SSDs. You're not going to find too many SSDs that are this fast. And really, in both instances, since they both have internal flash memory and really high-grade flash memory directly onto the logic board, you're going to find some extreme performance, and your applications and everything about your computer is just just going to be so lightning fast thanks to this memory system. Now, the last thing that we're going to do is test out a very extreme case of a high performance gaming benchmark. We're going to use this Heaven benchmark, which is fairly intensive, and I expect to see some pretty poor results on our integrated graphics cards built into our CPUs. You definitely want to use a discrete graphics card if you're going to do some serious GPU intensive applications, but let's for fun see how they do. Now, the Heaven benchmark fluctuates between different scenes, and your frame rate will increase and drop in certain areas and regions of this benchmark. Now, on average, we're getting the lowest on both computers will go down to 15 frames per second, and the highest on the MacBook Pro is about 25 frames per second. The Air, actually, I found it can go up to 26 frames per second, and sometimes a little bit higher, but on average 26 frames per second was at the high mark of the benchmark. So really they're both exactly the same in terms of performance. Occasionally you'll find one kind of getting one more frame or one more frame less than the other, but since they're running both a very similar GPU architecture, you're not going to find too much of a difference. And this Heaven benchmark is not fully utilizing the capabilities of the HD Intel Iris GPU that's actually in the MacBook Pro, so that's why you have such great similarities. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the overall battery life and the Wi-Fi capabilities of both these two devices. In terms of the Wi-Fi capabilities, both of the laptops are identical. The big thing is that they both have AC capabilities. They're both dual band 802.11n and AC, and they both have Bluetooth 4.0, so both laptops are fairly similar in terms of wireless connectivity. Now, in my opinion, if there's any reason for you to go with a MacBook Air over a MacBook Pro besides the overall form factor, is gotta be the battery life. One of the biggest things on the new MacBook Air is that it has a full day of battery life, 12 hours of web browsing, and the new MacBook Pro actually has 9 hours of web browsing thanks to the new Mavericks update, and it's a little bit more efficient. I'll give you an extra hour of web browsing. They both have 30 days of standby time, and obviously the battery is a lot smaller on the Air, but thanks to its CPU and power efficiency, it's getting incredible battery life. But the cool thing is that when you upgrade to Mavericks, you can potentially get 13 hours, since it adds about an hour's worth of battery life when you're browsing the web and doing all these things. So potentially you can get 13 hours of web browsing, which is absolutely insane and mind-blowing to find a computer that can do that at this kind of price range. So very competitive and a very, very cool battery life performance on that MacBook Air. But other than that, guys, if you have any questions about anything I talked about in this video, I know we discussed a lot about the differences and similarities between these two computers, which are from face value very, very similar, and even those physical differences become quite blurred as the MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs kind of progress. You can only make a computer so thin anyways. But if you liked the video, please make sure to give us a thumbs up, favorite if you can as well, and if you haven't checked out our Google Plus and Facebook pages, you definitely want to check those out if you have the time. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.